I think it's a viable approach to some part of the problems of poverty. It involves, first of all, cash payments rather than in-kind payments, as I understand it. It involves payments on a non-categorical basis.
What do you mean non-categorical?
That is to say, it doesn't matter whether you're a female-headed family or a male-headed family, or whether you're young or old, whether you're sick or well.
If your income falls below a certain level,
it does pay some guaranteed income level for people based on family size, and then it has a take-back rate, which is modest, I suppose, by definition. Now, the question is how many things you want to use that program to replace. How many things you want to replace with such a negative income tax program.
Would you replace everything with, just to clear that point up, would you virtually wipe out the remaining forms of welfare if you got this program going?
Yes, I would not. I think its purpose is precisely to provide a transition between where we are now and where we would like to go, because because I agree with you that given that we've corrupted the people on welfare and gotten them on there, we do have an obligation not to throw them out in the street and put them in the difficult adjustment you've made. We've got to ease it off.
Sure.
And so, but I would want to replace all present welfare programs.
Now let's get reactions to this and we'll come back to you.
Well, I saw some figures recently which said that if you took all the money spent on poverty in the United States and divided it by all the poverty family, you'd come up with a figure of $32,000 per family. Now, the average poverty family apparently is not getting the $32,000. And so clearly someone in between the Treasury and those families is getting an awful lot of that money. And I think that if you simply eliminated the middleman, as they say in the commercials, that there'd be an awful lot of benefit both to the poor and to the taxpayers.
I'm supportive of the negative income tax concept and the objective of it. I'd like to point out, however, that administratively we have another bureaucracy set up. Somebody has to take into account earnings. Someone has to decide when to pay back that which they're entitled to. There's a time lag between the paying back, the earning and the paying back. There are a variety of problems in there that I will be prepared to accept, but I want you to know that government intervention is not going to be eliminated.
The issue that I have is, where do children come in? What are their rights under a negative income tax? And are we, by building in a negative income tax, in fact subsidizing the illegitimacy that Tom Sowell is so concerned about?
The major reason it is not feasible today to have a negative income tax is because the present welfare bureaucracy would be out of work. They are the major objectors, as Senator Pat, and he's now Senator Pat Moynihan then demonstrated in his book on the Nixon program. The chief obstacle to getting it enacted was a welfare bureaucracy. So that I don't believe these administrative problems, if you got it enacted, would be at all serious.
I think the other assumption under the negative income tax, and it's one that I'm not sure I can buy, is that everybody has a minimum level of understanding about how to spend money. In other words, how to use the marketplace to satisfy wishes. And I, as an economist, could say, yes, we do. Everybody from age 4 to 100 knows how to use money to satisfy wants. And that's the premise.
They don't. There are all sorts of problems of people who are not going to be able to. But that's a minority problem. That's a problem for private activity and private charity. One thing is sure. They would be spending their own money, and that however knowledgeable you are about how to spend...
They would be spending my money.
They would be spending my money, but it would be one stage less bad. Right now, the welfare worker is spending Mr. A's money to help Mr. C. And there's a big takeoff in the middle, as Tom Sowell said.
The question is not whether people on welfare or on low incomes can all spend their money effectively. The question is, how effectively do they spend it as compared to how effectively the bureaucrats spend it for them? Comparing anything to perfection or to some arbitrary standard settles nothing. The same thing is true in the education area. They're saying, would families be able to select schools for their kids under a voucher system, for example? Well, the question is, could they possibly do much worse than the corrupt bureaucrats are doing in the public school system?
We're going on education in another program. Bob Lamp.
I want to quibble with something you said, Tom, about half of the money not going to the poor or something. That shouldn't lead the viewer to think that all that money is going to the administrators of programs. A lot of what you're talking about goes to non-poor recipients. For example, Social Security as a program pays roughly half of its benefits to people who otherwise would not be poor. Unemployment insurance pays about 2/3 of its benefits or so to non-poor persons. And those are, in some definitions, welfare or anti-poverty programs. And that's how statisticians come up with this horrendous sounding discrepancy between the total amount of money spent and the total cash benefits that go to the poor.
Well, I think it's a perfectly valid point, though, because supposedly we were not setting up unemployment benefits and Social Security in order to keep the affluent affluent.
Well, this goes back to this big philosophy debate we might have. I think it's easy to oversimplify things and say that all of these programs, including the public schools, are there to be of help to the poor and the poor only.
Yeah, but
let me mention that the negative income tax has some of its impetus in that it would be a way of confining benefit payments to people who are income poor.
Yes, absolutely.
And it would cut out benefits for an awful lot of people who now have expectations that they're going to get them, not in the form of public assistance, but in the form of social insurance, as we use the
Well, an argument could be made for not disappointing the expectations on which people have built their lives for one generation, but not of continuing for eternity in order to avoid one generation of transition.
What are the other hurdles to it getting underway? Now, you said, I don't know how seriously, the biggest, almost the only hurdle is the welfare bureaucracy.
No, they're the biggest immediate group of lobbyists that will lobby against it.
Yeah.
The biggest hurdle to getting it over at the moment is that there is no way of constructing a sensible negative income tax system that will not hurt some people. There will be some people who will get less money than they are now getting under it, particularly those in the upper income groups, particularly the affluent who are now being subsidized by the welfare. And they will make it politically difficult for the people to put it into effect. The attempt is to put a negative income tax in effect, which costs less money, is easier to administer, and yet which doesn't pay anybody in the society $1 less than he's now getting. There's no way in which you can construct such a program. But although it's not politically feasible now, the force of history is on its side. It's going to become politically feasible.
Let's not say that give the impression that welfare administrators were against negative income tax, the FAP program, for example, as Moynihan says, because they would lose their jobs, for example. Many of us were opposed to it because of certain features in that program. A $2,400 level for a family of 4. We were opposed to that. And if one goes down the congressional record, those who testified will be shown to be saying, yes, we're for it conceptually, but we're against this piece and this piece. If you change that, you have our support.
I was in the same position. I first proposed the negative income tax 25 years ago, but I testified against the final version of the Nixon plan. Why? Because the welfare bureaucrats had led them to introduce changes in it which converted it from a decent, satisfactory, negative income tax to one which would have been just as bad as what you now have. Would have been added on top of everything else. It's political reality, but political reality changes. And that's the important thing.